So imagine you're standing on this massive festival dance floor. Maybe you're in Berlin or Ibiza.
Right, prime global club territory.
Exactly. And the bass is vibrating right up through the soles of your shoes. But the heartbeat of the entire room, like the primary rhythmic engine driving tens of thousands of people, it isn't born from some European synthesizer.
It's a rhythm born in Lagos.
Yes. You are locked into a groove that completely ignores traditional musical borders.
Yeah.
We're looking at a landscape right now where the global club scene has, well, entirely rewired its own DNA.
It really is a massive structural shift. I mean, the center of gravity for global dance music has definitively moved, and it's pulling the rest of the world right into its orbit.
Yeah, it's not a small thing.
No, not at all. We aren't just talking about, a trendy sample pack being passed around producers. We are talking about a fundamental architectural change in how electronic music is actually built and how it's consumed on a global scale.
And that architectural change is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to the deep dive. We actually have our hands on a fascinating piece of source material that maps this out perfectly.
It really does. It's a gold mine.
It's this 2026 release from an entity called 786Muzik, LLC. The document is titled AfroHouse Story E04 Global.md. And our mission for this deep dive is to unpack the core of episode 4 of this story.
Which is laser focused on one massive, undeniable reality, right? Global Afro House.
Exactly. Global Afro House. Okay, let's unpack this, because if you follow electronic music, you know that the word global gets thrown around a lot, like constantly.
Way too much, honestly.
Right. But to give you the absolute baseline for where this deep dive is heading, we need to look at the mandate established right at the end of our source material. It declares, and this is a direct quote, "World Incorporating African Sounds."
Yes, with an exclamation point. That is the lens through which we need to view everything today. The active participant here is the world, and the action is incorporation.
It's aggressive.
Very. It's a deliberate adoption. And our source pairs this global Afro house with a very specific intentional descriptor. It calls it organic house.
Yeah, and for an audience that already understands the mechanics of electronic music, listeners like you, this pairing of global and organic is where the friction really starts to get interesting.
What's fascinating here is the tension between those two ideas. Because when we think of massive global electronic anthems, we typically think of the grid.
Oh, absolutely. The rigid mathematical grid.
Right. We think of perfectly quantized beats, kick drums that land perfectly on the 0.00 millisecond mark. I mean, it's engineered for massive sound systems.
Yeah, it has to be, or it sounds muddy in a big room.
Exactly. But organic house inherently rebels against that rigid quantization. It introduces something entirely different.
It introduces micro-timing. It's the slight swing of a shaker that's just a few milliseconds late, or a hand drum that breathes and pushes the tempo just a fraction before settling back into the pocket.
Yeah, it introduces human error, or rather human feel. It puts that feel back into a strictly sequenced environment.
I love that. Human feel. And the brilliance of what we are seeing in 2026, as outlined by the 786Muzik release, is that this organic element is no longer just a niche thing.
Right. It's not just for the chill-out room at 6 a.m. anymore.
No. It has been scaled up. The organic rhythms, these complex polyrhythmic percussion structures native to African sounds, they are being grafted onto the massive driving low end required for global main stages.
I want to try and visualize this for you, the listener. Think of standard, highly sequenced global tech house, like a beautifully constructed, modern glass and steel skyscraper.
Okay, I'm picturing it. Very sleek.
Right. It's impressive, it's huge, but it's rigid. It literally does not move. But when you inject organic house into that structure, it's like replacing the internal steel beams with bamboo.
Oh, wow.
Suddenly, the entire skyscraper can sway in the wind. It has flexibility. It actually breathes. It has a living texture to it that a purely synthetic production just can't replicate.
That is a wildly compelling way to look at it.
Yeah.
But let me twist that analogy just a bit, because I don't think it's just about swapping materials. It's about tension.
Tension? How do you mean?
Well, the skyscraper doesn't just sway, right? It relies on the tension between the rigid foundation, which is that standard 4-on-the-floor house kick, and the flexible organic percussion moving all around it.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, like if you remove the rigid kick drum, the track might be too loose for a massive global club crowd. They wouldn't know how to dance to it.
Right, it would just fall apart on a big floor.
Exactly. But if you remove the organic percussion, it's just another stiff steel building. The real magic of global Afro House is finding the exact breaking point of that tension.
That tension is a great transition point, actually, because you don't just stumble into that perfect architectural balance by accident. You need architects.
You definitely need people who actually know how to build that specific skyscraper.
And our source material explicitly hands us the vanguard of this movement. It names 3 specific acts driving this whole thing: Kind of Music, Bedouin, and Black Circle.
Kind of Music, Bedouin, and Black Circle.
These 3 names are positioned at the absolute center of this episode 4 narrative. I mean, they are the avatars for this global fusion. They're the ones taking the theory of organic house and the reality of global Afro house and actually executing it on the world stage.
Okay, but I have to stop you right there. I want to push back on this pretty hard.
Oh.
Because if you're a fan of this scene, and I know you, the listener, probably have all 3 of these acts in your streaming playlist right now, you know that musically, they are incredibly distinct.
Well, yeah, they certainly have very different sonic signatures.
Right. I mean, Kind of Music has this very specific, almost cloudy, highly melodic, deeply emotional groove.
Very Sunset in Ibiza vibes.
Exactly. And then Bedouin brings this incredibly hypnotic, almost desert trance, mystical weight to their sets. It's much darker. And Black Circle hits with a totally different kind of percussive energy altogether.
They do punch quite a bit harder.
So how can our source legitimately group them all together under one singular global Afro house umbrella? Doesn't lumping Bedouin and Kind of Music into the exact same category feel, I don't know, a little bit like lazy categorization?
That's a very fair question.
Doesn't the umbrella get completely meaningless if it covers things that sound so functionally different?
It's a completely fair critique if you are only analyzing them by their top-line melodies or, their preferred synth patches.
Yeah.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason they share this umbrella isn't because they are sonic clones of one another.
Okay. Why then?
It's because of their structural function within this movement.
Structural function. Explain that. What do you mean by structural function?
I mean, they're all solving the exact same mathematical equation for the global dance floor, even if they are showing their work differently. Think back to that overarching mandate we talked about.
The world incorporating African sounds.
Exactly. Kind of Music, Bedouin, and Black Circle, they act as the translation layer. They take the deeply complex regional organic rhythms we just talked about, and they format them for a crowd of 20,000 people in a massive arena.
Ah, I see.
They are grouped together because they are the highly visible delivery mechanisms for this incorporation.
So you're saying it basically doesn't matter that Bedouin uses different scales or textures than Black Circle, because beneath the surface, the rhythmic engine they're relying on to actually move the crowd is identical.
Precisely. They are all utilizing that tension we discussed earlier. They might paint the skyscraper different colors, sure, but the bamboo framework, that organic Afro house rhythm, that is the shared foundation.
Right, they're all using the same bamboo.
Yes, they are the active agents bridging the gap between regional origins and global domination. And honestly, to achieve true global adoption, a movement actually needs that variety.
That's a good point.
If every single global Afro house track sounded exactly like a Kind of Music release, it would just be a micro trend. It would burn out in 6 months.
That makes a lot of sense. The diversity of the vanguard is actually proof of the genre's scale. It's big enough to hold all of them. But let's dig into that shared foundation, because our 2026 source doesn't just leave it at vague African sounds.
No, it's very specific.
It pinpoints the exact regional engine driving this massive machine.
It zeroes right in on it. The text explicitly identifies the catalyst as Nigerian Afrobeats fusion.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. It doesn't point to South African Amapiano, which has obviously had a massive, massive global moment.
Amapiano was huge.
Huge.
Yeah.
But it specifically names Nigerian Afrobeats. And more importantly, it emphasizes the word fusion.
That level of specificity is crucial. It tells us that we aren't just looking at the global scene, respectfully borrowing a few Nigerian vocal samples and calling it a day.
No, it's way deeper than that.
We are looking at a fundamental structural merging of 2 distinct musical languages. Nigerian Afrobeats brings an entirely unique rhythmic sensibility. It has intricate syncopations, specific clave patterns, and a totally different way of conceptualizing the downbeat.
Right, because in standard Western electronic music, the emphasis is almost always aggressively on the one. Boom. Everything resolves on that first beat of the bar.
It's very predictable.
Very. But in Nigerian Afrobeats, the rhythm often dances around the one. It plays hide and seek with it. It forces your hips to move in a figure eight rather than just bouncing straight up and down.
That's the perfect way to describe the physical reaction to the music. And this raises an important question, right? How do you take that complex, syncopated figure eight groove and translate it for a global club audience?
An audience that has been conditioned for 3 decades to just bounce up and down to a 4-on-the-floor kick drum.
Exactly. How do you bridge that gap?
That is exactly where the fusion part of the equation comes in. Let's try another visual. Instead of the skyscraper this time, think about a massive industrial loom, like weaving a tapestry.
Okay, I'm following. Walk me through the mechanics of the loom.
So in weaving, you have the warp and the weft. The warp threads are the ones pulled incredibly tight vertically on the loom. They provide the structure. They hold the whole thing together.
Right.
In our fusion, the warp is the classic, unrelenting, 4-on-the-floor global house beat. It is tight, it is predictable, it is structurally sound.
It's the foundation that the global ear already implicitly understands.
Exactly. Now, the weft threads are the ones you weave horizontally through the work. They bring the color, the pattern, the actual art of the tapestry.
And that would be the Nigerian influence.
Yes. In this case, the weft is the Nigerian Afrobeats rhythm. It's those complex shakers, the offbeat snares, the syncopated vocal chops. You weave that deeply complex Nigerian rhythm right through the rigid grid of the house beat.
I really like this analogy because it highlights the necessity of both elements. If you only have the warp, just the straight house beat, you have a strong but completely blank, boring piece of fabric.
Right. It's functional, but it doesn't move you. It's just a blank canvas.
But if you only have the weft, if you just take the pure, unadulterated Nigerian Afrobeats rhythm and play it at peak time at a techno festival in Berlin, the crowd might actually lose the groove.
They wouldn't know what to do with their feet.
Right. Without the rigid warp to hold it together, the global audience, who doesn't natively speak that musical language, might find the fabric too loose. They won't know how to dance to it.
But the fusion, weaving them together, that is the Trojan horse.
It absolutely is the Trojan horse. The Nigerian Afrobeats fusion, identified by 786Muzik LLC, is the ultimate accessibility mechanism.
The steady house tempo provides a comfortable handhold for the listener.
Exactly. Your brain recognizes the 4-on-the-floor kick, so you step onto the dance floor, you feel safe. But once you are moving, the Nigerian rhythms woven through that beat just take over your body.
It bypasses the logical brain.
Completely. It speaks directly to the physical impulse to move.
And is that why this specific fusion is the engine for the World Incorporating African Sounds mandate?
Mm-hmm.
Because it cracked the code on how to make these rhythms universally digestible without, stripping away their soul.
Precisely. It didn't water down the Nigerian influence. It just provided a universal scaffolding for it. That's why acts like Kinda Music or Black Circle can drop these tracks anywhere in the world.
From Tulum to Tokyo.
From Tulum to Tokyo, and the reaction is immediate and visceral everywhere. The fusion acts as a universal translator.
But I want to linger on this concept of the universal translator for a second, because it brings up something that I think you, the listener, really need to consider regarding how culture moves.
It's a tricky dynamic.
It really is. When a regional sound like Nigerian Afrobeats becomes the primary weft for the entire global dance music tapestry,
Yeah.
what happens to the original art form?
You're asking if the process of fusion inherently corrupts the source material.
Yes. If the global market suddenly demands that all Nigerian rhythms must be woven into a 120 beat per minute house grid to be successful, doesn't that put immense pressure on Nigerian artists?
Pressure to change their native sound just to fit the global export model.
Exactly. To conform.
That is the perennial danger of any global cultural shift. Whenever the global north encounters a southern rhythm, there is a risk of extraction. But let's look at how our source material actually frames it.
Okay, what does it say?
The document doesn't say African sounds conforming to the world. It explicitly says, with an exclamation point, world incorporating African sounds.
The direction of the energy matters.
So you're arguing the center of gravity hasn't just shifted, it has actually relocated to the source.
I'm arguing that the fusion we are seeing in 2026 is a two-way street, but the momentum is entirely driven by the African elements.
Think about it. The global house scene was musically stagnating. It had reached the logical extreme of synthetic gridlock production. It actually needed the organic vitality of Nigerian rhythms more than Nigerian artists needed a 4-on-the-floor kick drum.
Wow, so they were the ones who needed the lifeline.
Yes, the fusion isn't a compromise, it's a conquest. The global architecture is bending to accommodate the Nigerian groove, not the other way around.
A conquest. That is a massive way to frame it.
Yeah.
But looking at the dominance of this sound, it's really hard to argue against it. The sheer undeniable gravity of that organic rhythm simply pulled the rest of the world in.
It's a beautiful thing to witness musically.
It is. And looking back at this incredibly dense, highly specific document from 786Muzik LLC, it's remarkable how a few key phrases completely map out this landscape. We've really pulled apart the threads of AfroHouse Story E04global.md today.
We certainly have. We started by defining the actual physics of the sound, the critical shift from synthetic grids to the breathing, microtimed realities of organic house.
We looked at why the global scene was just starving for that human element.
And we tackled the vanguard. We look at how Kaina Music, Bedouin, and Black Circle, despite their vast sonic differences, are operating as a unified front.
Right. They are the structural engineers utilizing that specific architectural tension to translate this sound for the masses.
And we broke down the core catalyst. We examined how Nigerian Afrobeats fusion serves as the perfect loom weaving the complex, deeply rooted syncopations of Lagos into the rigid, universally understood tempo of global house music.
It's the fusion that makes the entire movement undeniable. So what does this all mean?
What's the takeaway?
Yeah, for you, the listener, someone who already understands the mechanics of this music, it means that the next time you are listening to a global electronic set, you are essentially listening to a masterclass in cultural architecture.
Absolutely.
You aren't just hearing a neat drum loop. You are hearing the real-time translation of a regional powerhouse into a universal language.
Exactly. Knowledge is most valuable when you can hear it working out there in the wild. My challenge to you is to actively listen for the loom.
Listen for the loom. I like that.
Next time you hear a massive global Afro house track, mentally separate the warp from the weft. Listen to how perfectly the rigid house kick is holding up the intricate, organic, Nigerian percussion.
Focus on the tension.
Listen to the tension between the grid and the groove. Recognize the massive cultural incorporation happening right there in your headphones.
That is how you listen in 3D. But before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to mull over on your own.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Well, we've established that in 2026, the vanguard of global dance music is defined by this aggressive incorporation of African sounds.
Right.
The Nigerian fusion is the bleeding edge. It is the exciting, disruptive force breaking the old rules of the electronic grid. But music is a pendulum, and the global ear adapts incredibly fast.
Faster than ever now.
Exactly. So think about what happens when this fusion completes its conquest. What happens when the complex polyrhythms of Afro House are no longer the exciting alternative, but simply the completely normalized everyday baseline for all pop and club music?
That's a fascinating question.
Once the world has fully incorporated these sounds and this organic tension just becomes the boring new standard, what entirely new, fiercely isolated regional sound will the global machine try to incorporate next?